Hello, everyone, and welcome to our series spotlighting great luminaries in the field of neuropsychology, rehabilitation, and counseling. Our goal in this series is to put a spotlight on remarkable members of African descent, hear their stories, learn from them, and get some of their perspectives on life. And today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Precious Ogu. She is a practicing neuropsychologist who is based in Florida, and she has had a string of accomplishments that have led her to be an owner of her own practice. And so I'm very happy to talk to Precious today. Dr. Ogu, how are you?
Good morning. I'm doing very well, and thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you for coming and just sharing your perspective. I think we all are looking forward to learning more about you and all your accomplishments and what got you to the position that you're in today. Okay.
Absolutely.
But let's start at the sort of very beginning, uh, just to let everyone get to know you better. So, can you tell us where you were born and sort of raised? What was your sort of family background like?
Absolutely. So I'm Nigerian. I was born and raised in Nigeria, which is West Africa. So in terms of identity, I primarily, whenever I'm asked, I tell people I'm Nigerian. And then I have to think about it and realize that I am an American citizen. So I guess that makes me Nigerian American. But I was born and raised in Nigeria. I did most of my pre-university education in Nigeria. And I
Wow.
immigrated to the United States basically in the second half of high school.
Okay. What was that move to the US like, second half of high school?
Oh my goodness. That was for lack of a better term, a complete culture shock.
Hmm.
Like a lot of Nigerian children, before moving to the US, I was actually in a boarding school. And in my particular case, I was in a military boarding school.
Oh, wow.
So having to go from a military boarding school, very highly regimented, basically run like the military, to secondary school in the United States or high school in the United States was a major culture shock, on top of the fact that you're just in a completely different society.
Hmm.
Everyone looks different, everyone sounds different. And then you add in the contrast of going from this very highly regimented community to the American secondary school setting, which is not remotely as regimented as any education I had in Nigeria. So that was quite the adjustment. But thankfully for me, I was able to, in my opinion, assimilate pretty well.
That's good. That's good. And when you continued the rest of your schooling and just living in the US, did you feel like your background or your family's culture sort of helped you along the way, or was it a bit of a hindrance in terms of getting to know people and make friends? What was that dynamic like, sort of bringing Nigerian culture into this new setting?
Um, I think that a lot of Nigerians, at least the ones that I know, we have fairly adaptable personalities. We're fairly
Hmm.
gregarious. We like to have fun. We like to sort of celebrate. We like to party. So we're just generally good vibes. We're good
Hmm.
vibes people. So I think in coming to the United States, especially at the high school age, where standing out or being different in any way is not seen as a good thing, no matter
Right.
what that difference is. There was a bit of a sort of awareness that, okay, I'm not like everyone here. I'm new and everyone can tell. So I think it took me just sort of tapping into every ounce of emotional intelligence and social intelligence I could to sort of pivot that sort of tendency to stick out as a new
Hmm.
immigrant. I sounded different. I clearly looked different. It took every ounce of emotional and social intelligence I had to pivot that. And I really had to ask myself, okay, first of all, I had to be aware of the situation and accept
Right.
that these are, we're all teenagers, we're all young, our frontal lobes are not fully developed yet. So whatever's happening, try not to take it so personally. But at the
Right.
same time, look beyond that and find the strengths in your character and your personality that you can to just put your best foot forward,
Forward.
and
Right.
hopefully others will recognize that and return that output in kind. And thankfully, I'm personally happy to report that I didn't have a lot of issues in terms of adjustment or making friends or just fitting into the American high school setting, which can be very brutal for a lot of people,
Sure.
immigrants or not. So and I think a part of that is, not to toot my own horn, is just, again, as I mentioned earlier, my personality style is more sort of adaptable. I'm a very adaptable person. You put me in almost any environment and I will thrive. And it wasn't something I was consciously aware of at the time, of course, because I
Right.
was so young, but I will say that I made a sort of semi-conscious effort to take stock of my environment and put my best foot forward and essentially just be a good representation or a good representative of where I was coming from to a
Hmm.
lot of these people who really didn't know much about Nigeria or West Africa.
Right. Did you feel that pressure sort of to be that representative for Nigeria?
Absolutely. But I will say, interestingly, that pressure wasn't coming from the American side. It was more coming from the Nigerian side. And it
Mm,
wasn't an intentional pressure that was put on me. Again, it was just sort of this acute awareness that, okay, you're here now. When people hear you speak, because when you first arrive, you have a heavier accent. When people hear you speak, they know you're different and they're going to
right.
ask you where you're from.
Mm,
So it was just that acute awareness that once you let them know where you're from, they're making all these generalizations.
mhm.
So the tendency to be a good representative at that time, being new to the United States, did not come from the American side. It actually came
Mm,
the from me being aware that, okay, if I'm not a good representation, it's going to affect other people that are from where I'm from in a negative
right.
way.
Mhm.
So I again just have to put my best foot forward and sort of make them not judge other people like me harshly because of my behavior or my character or my personality.
Right. That makes sense. Yes, definitely. And growing up and schooling in both Nigeria and the US, one thing that I remark about all our members is we all have the spirit of hardworking and challenging ourselves academically. So I wanted
Yes.
to ask you about that. In your study, let's say your earlier studies, what was that drive you think you had that pushed you to succeed academically and work hard at school?
Oh my goodness. So the very first, it's like, a lot of Africans have this saying, or West Africans have this saying, charity begins at home. The
Yes.
very first setting, the very first sort of layer of motivation to do well academically started from the family. There was no other way to be. There were no excuses accepted. It became very clear from a very young age, pretty much since I could form conscious thought that there was no other way to be than than an academic and to excel and to do good in whatever it was or do well in whatever it was that you chose to do.
Right.
Personally, I'm the fifth of six children, so I'm to the credit of my siblings and my parents. All every sibling before me kind of lay a very good framework and a very good track record of just exceeding. This is straight from elementary school or primary school,
Mhm.
straight from kindergarten or nursery school, like just academic excellence. So
Mhm.
when you see, everyone who's come before you in that nuclear family structure doing well, it doesn't need to be said. It's just known that
Right.
you have to. There's no other way to be than do well. And
Yes.
aside from the sort of implicit message being sort of instilled in me, it was also made explicitly clear by my parents that not doing well in school was not an option. And this was from an very early age when we were still learning numbers and letters, that you are destined for greatness and you are destined to excel, and that you have the sort of the more intrinsic sort of genetic tendency to be a very to excel academically, to do
Right.
well in whatever you choose to do. And then you have the environmental support. You have siblings who've come before you who you can turn to for help. You have
Mhm.
no excuse to not do well in
Right.
whatever you choose to do. So in terms of motivations to just anything that I touch when it comes to academics or profession, to just push it to the max and make the most I can out of it. The first layer of motivation definitely was from the family, definitely was from the home. And then just getting older and, with the brain maturing and being able to take stock of things more around you, you start to have an idea of where you are trying to go in life.
Right.
So even when I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, I knew that whatever it was, I was going to do it well. I'm a naturally passionate person. If I like something, I pursue it as far as I can.
Right.
So getting older and becoming more aware of what I wanted my life to look like as it comes to profession and academics, that there also was sort of an internal drive to, okay, this is what you're going to do. You have to do it well, or don't even bother. Find something else to do.
Right.
Find something that's more within your sort of abilities. So I would say the first layer of motivation is the family. Again, it was made explicitly clear. Like there was no room for error. My parents were militant about doing well in school. And if you did not do well in school, they would have essentially a root cause analysis to see what exactly is going on here and how do we fix it. Because again, there is absolutely no excuse and no room for error. And secondly, it's just my natural intrinsic drive to just want to do well. And if I'm doing something, if I'm in a career where other people are affected, I want to put my best foot forward so they can have the best results. They can have the best value for this product that I'm offering them.
Right, right. Well, that's a good transition because you're talking about this passion and energy for academics. And with the theme of our group, of course, I want to know, where did psychology first kind of enter that thought of, oh, this is a subject, this is the field that I can study? Because I know, at least speaking for me, psychology isn't necessarily one of those subjects that is taught at the primary or the basic level of schooling. So I'm curious, when did that word even first kind of come up to you where you're like, oh, I can study this, and then I can perhaps pursue this professionally?
Absolutely. That's a very good question. So, as you mentioned, especially growing up in Nigeria, psychology is not one of the professions, like liberal arts in general, are not professions that are pushed on sort of burgeoning minds. It's usually, you know, the hard sciences, doctor, engineer, you know, maybe lawyer. Psychology or just mental health care in general is not sort of the first line when parents are sort of dreaming of what professions their kids would go into. But I personally have always known and have always had an awareness as early as I began to sort of have an idea of what I wanted to do with my life, that I was very, very interested in just human behavior and human mind and human motivations. And I knew that whatever I was going to do with my life was going to be something within that realm. I did not necessarily put the label of psychology on it because I wasn't thinking about it like that. But I knew that I just had this indescribable burning desire just to understand people on a deeper level and to understand the line between normal behavior and abnormal behavior and what is it that motivates us. And as I went through my education and as intentions became clearer, my dad actually studied psychology. Now, he's not a psychologist, but he studied psychology at some point. So in the house growing up, we had textbooks on abnormal psychology, even industrial organizational psychology and abnormal behavior. So I would also look into those and read them and be like, wow, this is so fascinating to me. Like this is what I want to do. And when it came time to sort of apply for college, it was a no-brainer. I was like, the best way to get into this, I'm interested in human behavior, I'm interested in human beings in general. The best way to do that would be just start with a degree in psychology. And when I signed up for that psychology major, honestly, I didn't have a clear idea of what I wanted to do with it long term, but I knew that I wanted to work with human behavior and human mind and human motivations, and this would be a good first step to take.
Okay. So no animal lab for you. It was definitely human.
No, humans only.
Humans only, okay. And I know some psychology, you do have to do a little bit of, working with mice sometimes and things, but you were always thinking about sort of like the person-to-person side of psychology.
Absolutely. Human beings are so fascinating to me. I think we're such fascinating creatures. And I will never, even before I started an educational path in psychology, just on a personal level, I would always sort of look into what was it that made us, what are we thinking? What was it that made us do the things that we do, for better or for worse? So I've always had this very, very deep, very keen interest in just human behavior.
That's great. So let's maybe get a little bit ahead, because I mean, just the career of a neuropsychologist is so multi-layered, and there's such a winding path from the undergrad to finally getting the accreditation. So let's just go a little bit into the grad school part of it, because I know that's really the meat and bones of when you're really sharpening your toolbox. So can you tell me who or what classes really influenced you, really sparked that sort of desire of, oh, wow, neuropsychology, this could be it? I'm curious to know what sort of, out of all the sort of paths you could have chosen in graduate school, what really made you say, oh, this is what I want to do for a living?
So when I started grad school, I didn't know what neuropsychology was.
Mm,
I had no idea that this was a niche or a specialty in psychology. When I started grad school, I was just going to become a therapist like every other psychologist. And it wasn't, I think, until, and that I was taking therapy, I was training in therapy, doing the therapy practica. I did not even conceive of the notion of what neuropsychology was. And it was just by chance that I think it was either in my first or second or maybe even third year of grad school that I needed an elective, and neuropsychology was available. So I took the neuropsychology elective because I needed it. It was something to
mhm,
do. And I just remember my eyes just, it was like the light had been off and someone just turned on the lights. I could not believe that this existed and I didn't know about it. Like the study of brain and behavior, and the
mhm,
study of how our literal physical brain and the things that happen in it can affect the way we function outside of our brain in the real world. I was just floored. And it was during that elective that I knew that I was not going to become a therapist. I abandoned that completely, and I knew that I was going to become a neuropsychologist. It was instant. It was like a match made in heaven. It was a done deal. I was done. And it was a huge commitment and a huge sacrifice, because a lot of people in neuropsychology, they've been on this path since undergrad. They were in labs, they
mhm,
did the research. I didn't have
mhm.
any of that because I didn't know what it was. So I essentially had to sort of start from scratch and abandon one course and start on another. And I had to play catch up with my peers. So, but that's how it came into the picture. It was just completely fortuitous that I needed an elective. Halfway through grad school, I took the elective, and I just, the perfect cementing of all this interest in human behavior that I had. And I think neuropsychology was sort of the first time the first time that I saw a specialty that sort of perfectly encapsulated all the different angles within which I could understand human behavior, because it has the neuro, it has the brain part, then it has the psychology, it has the behavior, and the sort of more motivational aspect. So that was how I got into neuropsychology.
And because it does require an additional few years of postdoc and internships, and then even getting the accreditation. Was there any point where you even had like any doubt, like, this is a lot, and I'm actually really have to invest a lot of my time, and I don't know, what stage of life you were in at the time, but were there any ever doubt, or was it really like, this is my passion, this is what I want to do? I'm going to go for
Um,
the internship, postdoc, everything.
was there any doubt, or did I think that it was just too much? Yes, constantly, even till this day, till today, as I'm sitting here talking to you, I have those thoughts all the time. But did I ever for a second think that I should maybe abandon it? Um, no. I will say that when, as I mentioned earlier, I was late to the game, I had a lot of catching up to do, and that sort of
Mhm,
extended or protracted the amount of time I spent in grad school. And it's the classic sort of trope of every PhD student when you're in grad school and everything kind of seems at a standstill, life in terms of life, and you see your peers are sort of hitting all these milestones and they're moving
mm,
on. And you're sitting here like, I have 4 more years of school left. Like, what am I doing here? But I think that in those times, it's when in those times, those times were when I felt that I was so grateful to have a passion for what I do. Because when you hit those moments of doubt,
mhm,
that's when the passion carries you through. Like all you have left
mm,
is the passion. There's no
right,
money, there's no glory, you're still a student. So there are not many sources of sort of validation. And that's when you really have to be grateful if you do have a strong passion for what you do, that you do have that passion. Because when I hit those moments, it was the passion just kind of sailed me through. But I never once really thought of changing course, because to me, like, this is what I do. Like, this is my, when we're talking about profession and work and career, like, this is it. There's nowhere else for me to go. I don't care about
right.
anything else. All I care about is neuropsychology. So once that layer of thought has kind of been put to the side, the next step is, okay, if this is an obstacle, how do we get through it?
Right, right. I love that line. When everything else is gone, all you have is your passion. I love that line a
Absolutely.
lot. Really.
Absolutely. That is a theory that has been tried and tested in my life multiple times. And that's when I think that just being a naturally passionate person, I'm really grateful for that, because when it doesn't just have to do with work, it's just life in general. When times are hard, when doubt starts to creep in, it's the passion that kind of reminds you that there's a fire driving you than anything that's sort of externally validating. Internal motivators are a lot easier to reconcile than external. So I will recommend to everyone, and I always do, find something you're passionate about. If it happens to make you money, that's good. And this is kind of a funny thing to say to Africans, because we don't care about passion. Go make some money, find something that fills up your bank account. But I'm telling you, as a mental health professional, I sort of value living a peaceful life and living a life that's well balanced. And one of my sort of first lines of advice is find something you're passionate about, because when things get hard, it's that passion that will like enable you to get out of bed in the morning and face that task. Yes.
Definitely. Definitely. Yes. Let's talk a little bit about the fruits of your labor and your long years of studying and practicing. So you have the distinction of being the founder of Zenith Neuropsychology, which I love that name, by the way, Zenith. Peak.
Thank you.
So your practice offers clinical and forensic services. So can you tell us, as much as you can, how you sort of got to this position where you're the founder and owner of your own practice, and what led to you creating Zenith?
The story's kind of long. I'll try to in terms of the motivations, it's kind of long and it's very deep, but I'll try to condense it for the sake of time. And I will take some responsibility for the fact that I made the very grave error of assuming that because I'm amongst fellow academics and fellow neuropsychologists and fellow psychologists, I made the mistake of holding them to a higher standard than I would hold anyone else, the average person, to. And I learned very quickly, as I mentioned earlier, that we're not infallible. Our system, our little system, our microcosm is not infallible to the same pressures of the general white supremacist structure that America operates under. And whenever I would give the benefit of the doubt and try to educate or try to just have a better understanding, I was met with and this was not one incident. This is this is my general experience, just being a Black woman in academia, in psychology. I was met with reactions that made it very clear that the quote unquote powers that be, the powers that are benefiting the most from this structure, have zero idea in relinquishing any sort of benefits or privilege that they have. So it became very clear to me that just remaining in sort of the larger institutional sphere was going to be, I was either going to have to just ignore a lot of things and be very miserable, or just be constantly fighting the battle of speaking out and bringing things to the forefront to people who don't really care about these issues, because they're at worst unaffected by it and at best benefiting from it. So that was just one arm of my motivations to sort of create a space for myself. And these are observations and experiences that I had from the very first day in grad school till the last day of my residency. So this is a good time sample to observe what it's like in neuropsychology for people who look like me. The second layer of motivation was more personal. As I started to come into my own as a neuropsychologist, as a professional, as a doctor, I started to form my professional identity, and I started to become very aware of what I wanted my product, whatever I was offering to people, to look like, and the level of the standards and the levels of quality and care that I want, that I felt that the people who are coming to me with these very serious concerns deserve. And this is not a slight on larger institutions in this sense, but I just started to think that for me to be able to have the level of impact that I want to on not even necessarily on the field, just on individuals, on the patient, that I was going to need a space to be able to do things the way that I wanted to, when I wanted to, how I wanted to, make decisions that I felt would be best for my patients without really having to consider how it would affect a larger system. Because a lot of the time, having to sort of kowtow to institutional pressures can affect patient care. And I've had that experience because from my entire training and schooling was in larger institutional type settings. So I just kind of knew that if I could afford myself the luxury of being able to do things the way I wanted to, being able to provide or offer my product the way that I wanted to, that would be where I would be most at peace and where I would be the most effective. So I started to realize that If possible, I would do everything I possibly could and sacrifice everything I possibly could to create that space for myself. Now, did I think that I would do it right after fellowship? No. But I knew I would do it. It was just a series of events, or just a series of, I would call it crazy decision making, that led to that timeline being so much shorter and me starting Zenith right after residency. And let me see, I'm trying to think of any other factors that kind of motivated me to create my own space, or create my own little space in neuropsychology. If I think of anything else, I'll add it later. But in
Sure.
terms of the motivations, it was just primarily, first of all, just looking around and realizing that I would be very, because of the way I interpret things, and because of the way because of, I'm not one to diminish my voice, especially when I feel people are being mistreated or being prejudiced against or discriminated against. It would be a daily uphill battle to continue to immerse myself in larger institutional type settings, because of my experience in them has not been, I wouldn't say my experience hasn't been great, but I just observed a lot of things that definitely could change. And
Right.
secondly, I just knew that the way that I wanted to do neuropsychology, and the heights to which I wanted to take my patient care, and again, to the heights with the standard to which I wanted to hold the product that I'm offering, that I would be best suited by doing that in a space where I essentially call all the shots.
Yes. Right. So what are, I see obviously the benefits of, as you say, calling all the shots, but what are some of the unique challenges of being the founder and owner of Zenith?
Calling all the shots.
It's a
That is,
double-edged sword.
yes, a double-edged sword, absolutely. Not to mince words, but starting and founding Zenith has been possibly the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. It is a whole layer. It's a new layer of cognitive functions and executive functioning, when you have to be everything. You have to be
Mm,
the clinical expertise, you have to be the tech support, you have to be the janitor, you have to be the psychometrist, at least in the beginning for me. And just to provide some context, I'm not like our ex-president. I don't have a wealthy family who gave me a small business loan of $1,000. Everything that I did in founding Zenith was done like grassroots, from scratch. There was no endowment, there were no investors. Everything from the clinical to the financial to the business was self-taught, self-learned. I never took a business class. So I had to learn how to do a lot of things in a very short amount of time, and do them well, because unlike when you're working for somebody else, when you're working for yourself, if you make a mistake, it falls on you. And
right.
one bad mistake could be the end of your business.
Hmm.
So it is in many ways the hardest thing I've ever had to do, because I had to really, thinking that I was done with school and the learning had stopped. No, I had to now learn all these other things that I needed to know to keep because it is a business first and foremost, to keep the
Right.
business viable and substantial. So that would be I won't call it a downside, because it's part and parcel of the experience, but I would say that was one of the steepest learning curves, was realizing how much responsibility it is when you take business ownership away from the theoretical to the
Right.
practical.
Right. Of course. Yeah. And so one of the services that I saw on your website is forensic services. And I think forensic neuropsychology is a very unique aspect that we don't often get to talk about. So
Mhm.
I wanted to know, because you speak so passionately about curating your own space, working in that specific field of forensic neuropsychology, has that given you sort of a perspective or a unique understanding of how the justice system operates in America? And what are you doing to sort of, in any way, sort of um, add to that, or sort of address some of the issues that you may have found?
So I want to take a step back, because that question actually reminded me of another sort of major motivating factor in terms of creating my own space, was
Mhm.
that I always knew, and this is another layer, another layer of sort of my existence as a neuropsychologist. I've always known that I wanted to work with in the forensic realm. I mentioned when we started that one of my biggest motivations for getting into psychology was my just this very keen interest in abnormal behavior. So the moment I knew what forensic psychology was, or forensic neuropsychology, I knew, yep, I'm going to get into that, because that's even another layer of understanding the extreme end of human behavior, which is the abnormal end, that the part of it that gets a lot of people into trouble and that kind of destroys lives. I want to get in there. I want to know what that's all about. So in terms of creating my own space, another motivation that I had to create my own space was I wanted to, because I am formally trained in forensic neuropsychology. My fellowship was a forensic neuropsychology fellowship. So I knew at that point that I was going to be doing this as a part of my career. And I also enjoy clinical work. So I knew I had to create a space where I could easily do forensic work and clinical work without them conflicting with each other, without anyone telling me, oh, you can't see a forensic case because you have to be at work, on this day. So I knew I had to be in a situation where the schedule was completely flexible and completely at my discretion. And that's another benefit of that was another main factor in motivating me to create my space with Zenith, because I could see as many clinical cases as I wanted, as many forensic cases as I wanted, at my discretion, without the added stress of worrying about scheduling and commitments.
Mm-hmm.
But to answer the question that you just asked, which was if being a forensic neuropsychologist has sort of informed or shifted my view of the criminal justice system, I will say, in a way, on the one hand, just being a Black person in America who's just a generally tries to stay aware, I'm not really seeing anything that's shocking me or surprising me that I wasn't aware of in terms of just how race relations play into the criminal justice system in the United States. But on the other side of it, I always have to remember that my role is to be an informed evaluator, but also remain unbiased. So I don't bring any of the quote unquote trauma of being a Black woman in America or Black woman in academia into my work as a forensic evaluator, because I have to remain objective and unbiased. But I will say that I have had judges and attorneys who have retained me or hired me because of the unfortunate number of people who look like me in the criminal justice system. They appreciate having someone who looks like me to do the examination. Forensic neuropsychology and forensic psychology in general is extremely white. So and this is not even coming from me. This is coming from people in different prongs on different sides. This is coming from the prosecutor's office, from the defense attorney's office, from the judge themselves, that there's a lot of nuance that can be missed when you're having, experts evaluating people who they don't really have any commonality with. And that kind of, despite their best efforts and best intentions, leaves them blind to certain things. So as I said earlier, my role is to be as objective and unbiased as possible. But even the people who are the actual legal experts, because I'm not a legal expert, I'm a mental health expert. But even the actual legal experts tell me a lot of times that they can tell that the work product is a little bit more nuanced and I'm sure it's not just me, I'm sure the same applies to other Black and brown forensic experts as well, that they can see the nuance with the sort of the approach that we take and the way we view things, because there's not this sort of huge discrepancy between the evaluator and the person being evaluated.
Right. And do you even sort of see that relief or recognition with the people you're evaluating? Do you sort of see that connection of?
Almost always. I couldn't even wait for you to finish the question. I was like, yes. Yes, you can literally see the physical reaction when you walk into, because a lot of the times these defendants have had multiple doctors come and talk to them, and they are rarely Black. And a lot of these defendants are Black, like Black people are unfortunately overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And a lot of the time you can almost see like a physical, palpable relief when you walk in to examine a Black defendant as a Black doctor. And a lot of the times, even when you're hired by the side that's trying to put them away, for example, even when I'm hired by the state to examine a defendant, meaning I'm hired by the side that's trying to put them in prison or in jail, you can tell they're still relieved that they're talking to someone who they feel like can understand them on a different level. And it's not about understanding them in terms of like doing something nice for them. It's just the resignation on their face that their attorneys, their judges, their bailiffs, everybody in the court, all the other doctors they've seen have been very white and and you can draw whatever conclusions you can about what the interaction between a white doctor and a Black criminal defendant would be like. So when they see me, no matter what side I'm hired by, you can almost, and sometimes they verbalize this sort of relief that, wow, okay, so people like you exist. Now let's sit and talk. So I can't really speak to the defendant's experience beyond that, but I will say that for the defendants themselves, again, all parties involved have verbalized to me on multiple occasions how there is a need in the forensic realm for experts of color and Black experts in particular, because they have noticed that the work product, and it's not saying that it's better than other non-Black experts, it's just saying it's more nuanced, that they appreciate the attention we pay to those things that people who don't look like us are more likely to miss, or even people who don't look like us don't care about, period.
Right. And so I can see how valuable someone like you in your position is to the community. And I'm sort of thinking, because you're based in Tampa, is that correct?
Yes.
And obviously there's a whole swath of the America that really could value from the service that you're offering, and just this connection that you're able to make that other institutions wouldn't be able to. So I'm curious, and maybe you haven't thought about this, although knowing you, like I'm beginning to, I think you have. What do you see as the trajectory of Zenith? Where would you like your practice to go in the future? And do you see it in any way expanding or growing from what you've already established?
Absolutely, 100%. That's the entire point. One of the main tenets of my business model and my, professional model is I want to be able to, within my expertise and my talents, reach as many people as possible.
Mhm.
So my specialty is neuropsychology, clinical and forensic, but I want to expand and expand the team so we can expand the range of services we provide. I want to provide services to the pediatric population. I want to provide therapy services. I want to provide, cognitive rehab services. I want to expand reach. I think that, especially since I started my business as a neuropsychologist, I'm surprised at the demand for our services, not just neuropsychology, but psychology in general. You would not believe how hard it is to make an appointment with a therapist, at least in my part of the country, to make an appointment with a therapist or to get an evaluation. If you're actively dementing, or if you're suspected to be actively dementing, you can't wait 4 or 5 months for an appointment. So the demand is so great. And there are other structures in place that just make it difficult, because then you add in the insurance part of it, and you add in the ability of the average person to pay out of pocket for these, pricey services like, medical and mental health services. So the demand, my point being, the demand far exceeds the supply. And one of my sort of primary goals as the business grows and I continue to grow as a professional is to just increase reach, hire doctors that can evaluate in other languages than English, because cognitive disorders don't discriminate, anybody can get it. So my goal is just, one of my long-term goals, short and long-term goals, is just to increase reach and just have better accessibility to different kinds of people that are not, just typical English-speaking adults.
Right. And I'm glad you touched upon the idea of just hiring more people and expanding, because it sort of transitions me to my last set of questions for you, which is that we're in this burgeoning group, as you know, and we're still trying to sort of find our footing, I guess you can say, and bring all people of the African diaspora together to talk about things we can do to elevate our community. And so I'm thinking sort of about the people, such as myself perhaps, who are in the early stages of their career, who are still sort of navigating the world of psychology or neuropsychology. Just from your experience and for where you are today, what would you say we should do to sort of get our foot in the door and really sort of make it in this very difficult and challenging profession and just study?
I would say a few things actually, but the very first thing that kind of popped to mind as you were talking about that, and this is probably because I'm a more recent graduate, I'm very early career. One of the first pieces of advice that I can give you is, is, or give people in that phase of their training and career, is it's never too early to start forming your professional identity. The earlier and the sooner you know who you want to be and what you want to stand for as a doctor, or as a mental health professional, the clearer it will be in terms of carving out your path. I think that in my experience, and this is a situation of learn from my mistakes, I think that I got into the field without having a solid enough professional identity. And your professional identity, it's dynamic. It's something that's constantly changing and growing, and you're taking in information and modifying as needed. But I feel like my sense of professional identity was way too loose when I was thrown into the system of, academia and neuropsychology. And because of that, it made the journey a bit more difficult, because again, as a Black woman in neuropsychology, there's a constant battle in terms of advocating for yourself and standing up for what you stand for, and then just sort of submitting yourself or acquiescing to, again, that white supremacist power structure that permeates every aspect of our existence in America. So if I had a stronger professional identity before starting this journey, I feel like I wouldn't have been as emotionally or mentally affected by some of the experiences that I had that were directly tied to sort of social and political issues and cultural issues as well. So one of the best advice would be, you don't have to have your professional identity perfectly formed in the beginning, but at least start thinking of what kind of doctor do you want to be? How do you want to inform your work? How do you want people to view you? What sort of what do you want to stand for? And I think that will help. That will help you be more or be less vulnerable to the influences of just the negative influences in general, especially the ones that are more likely to affect us as Black people in academia.
Right. Exactly.
And in terms of other things that I would sort of, the other pieces of advice I would offer is keep in touch with your mentors. Keep in touch with the people who you've established want to see you do well. For example, and this is a whole other story that I will save for another time, but me stepping into the field of forensic psychology was solely by the design of a very cherished mentor that I had. And forensic psychology is something I'm so deeply passionate about my forensic expertise and my forensic work and my forensic career. And I've been wanting to do it for a long time. But as I mentioned earlier, I was late to the game of neuropsychology. So all my energy was spent breaking into neuropsychology. There was no time or energy to break into the field of forensics, which is a niche, a specialty of a specialty. So my entry into the world of forensic psychology and neuropsychology, to the point of even being formally trained in it, was strictly by the design of a mentor that I had, who was always aware that I was interested in forensic work because I wouldn't shut up about it. And she always knew that I wanted to work with the criminal population. And when she found out about a very, very good opportunity for me to get a leg in, she let me know, and the rest is history. So I would say all that little story, the point I'm trying to make is keep in touch with your mentors. Not everyone you will meet in your career wants you to do good. There are people who actually actively don't want you to do good because of their own agendas. And I don't mean to make anyone scared or paranoid, but that is just simply the fact of it. There are a lot of people in our field who see people that look like us, and it triggers something in them, and they don't like it. So, and I've had that experience with multiple people, enough people to confidently speak on that. So I would say identify the people that will comprise your village. Identify the people that you've confirmed want to see you do well. Keep in touch with them. Seek out their advice. People who have done this before you for decades or years and have done it well are very good people to have in your village, because they've seen things happen. They can sort of let you know what to watch out for. And also on the more sort of clinical end, they are very good sources to consult with, especially if you're like me and you're in private practice, which can be sort of insular. It's kind of separate from everything else. So important to maintain a professional network of people whose expertise and whose intentions you trust.
Right.
I'm trying to see what else. Those are kind of two big ones that just jumped into my mind as you asked the question. But let me see, because I know I have a lot to say about this. I don't know why I'm blanking right now, because my journey through neuropsychology has been rather eventful. Let me see. Just give me a second. Let me think. I would say it's never too early to sort of get a sense of if you want to niche yourself and what niche you want to go into. I would say that because I discovered neuropsychology relatively late in my career, it was a lot more work trying to break in than it would be if I had known what it was earlier. So I would say it's never too early to just educate yourself on the field that you're in. Educate yourself on what the possible career paths are, what the possible specialties are, what the possible populations of interest are. Do you want to be in high demand? Do you want to deal with or go to or be in a specialty that has a lot of high demand? Do you want to be in a specialty that you really like and you get that internal validation from every day? But notwithstanding, educate yourself on the field that you're in. Know what all the possibilities are, and then if you find something that you really like, start the process early, network in that specialty earlier, learn more about it, see if it's something that you actually want to do long term. Talk to people in the field who've been doing it longer than you, maybe even shadow them, set up a meeting with them to see if your idea of what the specialty entails is actually what it does entail, because the last thing you want is to spend 6-7 years curating a specialty for yourself, and then you enter the real world and you realize that you don't like working with kids, or you don't like working with the elderly population, or you can't stand working with people who have psychosis. So I would say just educate yourself on the field that you're in. Know that there are many ways to be a psychologist. There are many ways to be a mental health psychologist, a mental health professional. There are different things that you can do, but know what your options are so you can pick the one that's best suited to you, and you don't waste time, money, student loans, etc., training for a field or a specialty that at the end of the day you realize you'd rather not be in. And I will say, I keep wanting to veer into like business advice, but that's not what this is about. That's a separate meeting. But yeah, those would be the big things I would say is just find your village and nurture those relationships. Know the field that you're in, and know what options are available to you in terms of career paths within the larger career path.
Right. And I wanted to end it there, but you touched upon something that I think really needs to be stressed, especially in our community.
Nana, I have time. Don't feel the need to go ask whatever you got me. Ask whatever you want to ask.
Appreciate it. But let me just sort of follow up with something, because I think this is a good thing to sort of finalize or end on, is our community, when you talk about the struggles and you even talk about people who may actively be against us,
yes,
for us who are early on, that alone can be so discouraging. And it could just be a thing of, I walk in a room and I'm the only Black person there, or I'm part of this neuropsychology club and I don't see anyone who looks like me. And even my family don't really get what this neuropsychology thing is. They're African, all these things are, they kind of build up. And depending on where you are in life, whether you're young or you're kind of late in the game and you're thinking of a family and all that, these pressures can really build. And I know you can't sort of tackle all of what I'm talking about, but I guess I would ask you, in your own struggles and stress and even fighting against people who are working against you, what did you do for your own mental health? What kind of helped you stay sane and centered and allowed you to persevere despite all the sort of elements that may have been stacked up against you?
I would say first and foremost, it helps having a family full of academics. I'm lucky enough to have a family full of academics who took similar paths in terms of having to go to school for a lot of years to end up in the career paths that they wanted. So having people to just debrief with who actually understand the process, and people who because these are, family members that you automatically know that they're more likely to be on your side. So having people to just like listen to you vent and rant is very helpful. I know that if my family and friends had to write a book about all my ranting and venting for all my years of schooling, it would be a bestseller because it would just look completely unhinged. But that's because I had observed some things that I did not expect from people of our caliber. But this was before I realized that we're as human as anybody else, and any character or moral failings that anyone else is susceptible to, so are we, regardless of whether we're mental health professionals or not. So the first thing that I kind of realized was, don't hold people in this field to a higher standard than you would hold anybody else. Every undesirable trait and characteristic I've seen in people outside of our field, I've seen in people in our field. So in terms of how to cope with that, first of all, was just the realization that we're not special. People assume because we went to school and learned about human behavior and psychology that we are all of a sudden sort of elevated. We're not. So just acknowledging that these are human beings that I'm dealing with in this field, and that they're going to frustrate you as much as anyone else sometimes. That acknowledgement and that accepting that, we're not. And honestly, I think that was part of my ego, erroneously making that conclusion. I'm a psychologist, we're elevated, we would never do such. So that's sort of the death of that part of my ego, and accepting that, oh no, we're psychologists and we're just human. That really went a long way towards helping me process some of these experiences better. But as I said earlier, like, rant, vent, lean on your family and friends. Luckily for me, I have a lot of friends. Some of my closest friends are also psychologists, and we actually went to school together, so they get it. So talking to people who get it, who won't really judge you, who you don't have to explain things to. The last thing you want to do when you're just ranting is start explaining things. So when you send an unhinged text, you want people who just read it and get it. So I would say, whether you're in grad school, whether you're at work, again, it goes back to sort of finding your village, seeking out people who you trust have your best interest at heart and who you can vent to. Another thing that I would say is, do not be afraid to seek professional help. This is, again, another misconception that a lot of people have, believe it or not, that because we're psychologists, that we can't see a psychologist, or that we should be ashamed about seeing a psychologist. And I tell everyone, whatever it is you need, therapy, medication, support groups, counseling, whatever it is that you need, that you feel that, the people around you cannot provide, and you need that extra layer of care, engage it. That's what it's there for. I think our field is fairly unique in the sense that, for example, using myself as an example, during forensic work, I come across a lot of information that's very difficult to stomach. And because I've always known that I wanted to work with abnormal behavior, I personally have a very high threshold for abnormal behavior, to be in terms of being bothered by the things I see or read. But sometimes I even see some things in my work that just kind of shake me. And I can only imagine people who don't have that sort of threshold, or who are a little bit more moved by the things that they take in. I can only imagine how they cope in a field like ours, where our job is to take in the worst of people's experiences. So I would definitely recommend, in terms of coping, that you need to go ahead and seek whatever level of care it is you think that you need in that particular moment. Continuing to take in such things without having an appropriate outlet for processing it will burn you out very quickly. So I recommend that do not be afraid to seek professional help. And another thing, this is more the neuropsychologist in me speaking, is grad school in psychology is very stressful. And the further you go, when you get to your dissertation, and then you get to applying for internship, and then applying for residency, we're 6 months into internship, and then we have to start applying for fellowship. So it's especially when you get to the end stage, it's very, very stressful. It's financially stressful. It's mentally stressful. It's emotionally stressful. When we get stressed, things that lay dormant, whether it's anxiety, whether it's psychosis, whether it's ADHD, whatever it is, things that lay dormant get triggered by stress. Stress is one of the biggest triggers for any sort of mental health episode. So be aware of that, and maybe take proactive or preventative steps. So at the time where you need your faculties to be the most intact, which is when you're applying for internship and going on interviews, that you don't feel sort of burnt out, and you don't sort of start to drown or suffocate under the weight of the responsibilities in front of you. So I would say, don't be afraid to seek a higher level of care that you need at any point, but also be proactive, engage in self-care, pay attention, monitor your own mental health and mental functioning, knowing that when the stress kicks in, you may not have the time to rebound, because like I said, you interview and apply and match for internship, you're still getting acclimated to all these new things you're learning. And then 6 months later, you're doing the same thing for fellowship. So you don't really have a time to sort of take a step and breathe. So being proactive about just making sure that your mental health, your spirit, your soul is sort of balanced before you enter that phase is a very, very good idea.
Right. Wonderful advice from someone who has been there and now just running things so admirably. And I thank you
trying.
so much.
Thank you.
Oh, you are. No, but you are. Yeah. Just from your words and everything you said, your wisdom really does seep through. And I think people in our community are really going to appreciate what you have to share and just sort of learn from your example, learn from, the successes, the mistakes you had, but just learn from you and take away so much. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
You're very welcome, Nana. And I do want to add that there's no, just generally speaking, there is no cheat sheet, or there's no foolproof way of getting through this journey to be a psychologist or a neuropsychologist. No matter what I say or what anyone else tells you, it's a very difficult road to take. You're going to meet challenges. You're going to meet challenges that no one ever warned you about before. I definitely did. So, you just have to give yourself grace and know that you're going to meet situations that sometimes are going to floor you, or that you don't have any sort of frame of reference to handle. But one thing that I definitely believe is that we are capable of so much more than we think. I definitely, that again is another theory that's tested and true throughout my entire education, is that you don't think you can do something and you're faced with it and you have no choice but to do it. And then there's another new skill set that you've learned. So I would say I want to sort of dispel the spirit of fear, anxiety that people who are just on the beginning of their journey may have about embarking on this journey, because you're going to have hard times. You're going to have hard times where you feel like you want to quit. But I just want you to take it from me for what it's worth, that you are capable of so much more than you think. And these roadblocks can be overcome if you just pause and take a breath and engage your critical thinking and problem solve.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you again for your patience with me and all the technical issues. Much appreciated.
Me too. I'm sorry.
On your own too. Maybe it was the powers that be trying to get us, but we powered through.
I know, they don't want us to talk about stuff.
Great. Okay. It was great
I'm
talking
very
to
happy that we got to do this. Thank you so much for even reaching out. I'm not going to bore you because we all have our problems, but just with being a recent graduate and starting a business, like there's no time to breathe. There's no time for anything. And if you didn't reach out to me, I wouldn't even know that this was a thing that you guys were working on. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. So thank you. And Sarah for taking this initiative. And this is such a good idea. Like, I wish I could do more. I just physically don't have the hours in the day, but fingers crossed, when the business grows to where I can have a little bit more free time, I want to see how I can get in there and just like be of service to our group.
And we'll look forward to that and your input, of course. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful Saturday. Again, thank you so much for having me.